The best time to pay your credit card always revolves around when the lender reports the balance. Almost all lenders, except for US Bank and a few other smaller ones, report the balance as of the last day of the billing cycle, or the statement end date. Don't confuse the statement end date with the payment due date. In this video, I'll break down some of the confusion around when borrowers should pay their credit cards to boost and maintain a higher credit score. I'm Cap, and welcome to Screaming Lincoln's Consumer Credit Series. Let's explain the anatomy of paying credit cards. First, there is the billing period, which lasts 1 month. Upon the end of the billing period, a billing statement is generated. This date when the statement is generated is the statement end date. The confusing part for some people is understanding that it is the end date of the prior billing period that just ended, hence the name statement end date. This date is often the most important date borrowers will want to know. I'll explain why later. At some point after the statement end date, the payment due date will follow. The payment due date usually comes 20 days after the statement end date. But some borrowers may give additional days. This period between the statement end date and the payment due date for any given billing cycle is commonly referred to as the grace period. For most lenders, it is the amount of float time given to borrowers to pay for all charges that stem from the prior billing period to avoid interest. Some lenders, like American Express, issue charge cards which must be paid in full by the payment due date. However, most lenders allow borrowers to pay a minimum amount and will allow borrowers to carry their unpaid balances into the next billing cycle. Interest usually is incurred for this privilege. It is possible to not have interest when paying just the minimum amounts on cards when lenders are generous enough to offer 0% APR terms for a predetermined period, usually between 6 and 21 months. Let's review some of the components around when to pay cards. First, there is a billing period that must end. When a billing period ends, it has reached its statement end date. Again, this is a very important date, and I'll explain why shortly. Then a grace period usually follows for at least 20 days after the statement end date. Upon the end of the grace period comes the payment due date. If the total amount of charges from the prior billing period is not paid by the payment due date, then interest is usually incurred and the residual balance from the prior billing period rolls over into the new current billing period. Interest is usually compounded daily and brings up a whole new headache of issues like trailing interest, which is a separate topic for another video. Generally, it's best to avoid interest and pay in full unless the lender is offering 0% APR terms, but I'll get into why that still might not be the best option when it comes to maintaining a high credit score. Everyone knows to pay by the payment due date, preferably in full to avoid interest. So why do some people that pay their cards in full every month and never pay a dime in interest still get saddled with low credit scores? The answer is credit utilization being too high. It's a very easy fix. All the borrower needs to do is add an extra payment on the date the lender reports the balance. That's it. The hard part is knowing just when the heck lenders report because they don't all follow the same rules around when they report. Remember what I said about the statement end date being important? The statement end date is the most important date for borrowers that use their cards daily and rack up high balances. Even though these same borrowers pay down their cards in full every month, credit utilization can still be very high depending on what and when the lender reports. Here's an example. A borrower that typically spends $2,000 every month for the same stuff. Notice how they pay in full every month. More importantly, notice when the lender is reporting the balance. This should be considered the second pay date in my opinion. If doing something as simple as making an extra payment can boost my credit score over 100 points, then why aren't lenders more upfront about this? Better yet, inform borrowers when their balance will be reported to the credit bureaus so borrowers can plan their extra payment around this date. But that will never happen because the credit system is a big game rigged against borrowers. Here's what you can do to level the playing field. Set up the card for auto pay so the statement balance is always paid in full. This will avoid interest. Then do a second payment on the statement end date of the current billing cycle. Try to avoid making any large purchases around this time. You don't want that large transaction showing as pending, then it posts later on that same day. This will cause your score to plummet with a huge credit utilization rate. A good credit scheme will really help. Once you've opened some cards, preferably ones with the payment network logo on it like these, then you can set up your own recurring or manual charges every month with low amounts on all cards. Then auto pay them and repeat every month. Some lenders don't use the statement end date as a reporting date. That's okay. All you have to do is adjust your extra payment around this date. US Bank and a few other lenders will use some other date as their reporting date. This site here, Doctor of Credit, is a great resource for finding more information on when lenders report. Keep in mind that things change over time, but most of what is found here is current and close to accurate as possible. The important thing to remember is find out when your lender is reporting the balance and pay accordingly. Download the Experian and Credit Karma apps to see which date your lenders are reporting your balances to confirm for yourself. In summary, remember to make a second payment on any card that you plan on using repeatedly throughout the month. Find out which date they report and pay accordingly. For any card that doesn't get used, try to implement your own credit scheme I mentioned earlier using a single low-amount transaction and auto pay. Some lenders will quote-unquote forgive balances under $1, so I've always used $1 as my amount. My Barclays card keeps forgiving my 2 45-cent transactions for a couple water gallon refills every month. Free water for me, but my balance stays zero and a payment doesn't get reported. Great thing about cards that don't get used is that the low activity credit scheme doesn't require a second payment. The card that gets used daily will require more attention, but once you know when the lender reports, you know what to do. Have you had any experience paying lenders at a certain date? Let me know in the comments anytime. Hit it, Steve.